Hey guys, what's up? It's iFlynn here. Welcome to my Ultimate Vault build guide for 2024. Now we're just going to be doing this live because I figured, you know what? It's easier to just show things off live instead of like doing the whole scripted stuff. So the first thing that we're going to go through is Vault and all of his abilities. So his first ability is called Shock. Now this is a single target ability where you aim at an enemy, you press the button, and the enemy's going to get electrocuted. Then enemies around, they're going to get chained to, and the damage is also going to be applied to them. So it's just a stun and a little bit of electro damage. The second ability is Speed. Is going to give you a movement speed buff, a reload speed buff, and a melee attack speed buff, so it's quite nice like that. The third ability is Electric Shield. This is going to absorb any damage coming into it like this, but if you fire through it, you're actually going to get bonus electric damage and bonus crit damage, and you get 50% bonus electric damage at a time, though you can stack these shields up to 6 times, so I can go ahead and I can place 6 shields on top of one another, so that's 3, 4, I need more energy, let's get some over here, 5, and 6, if I shoot through it, I have a lot more bonus electric damage, so 300 bonus electric damage. I also have bonus crit damage, but that is going to stay at 100% bonus crit damage no matter the amount of shields that you're shooting through at a time. The fourth ability is called Discharge, where you're just going to go ahead and jump into the air and you're going to let out lightning from your body, and it's going to shock all the enemies around you, chaining lightning and just dealing some lightning damage over time or electric damage over time. And that's basically all it does. It is a crowd controlling stunning ability, which is also dealing some electric damage over time, which is quite nice. And then on Vault, we've actually got 3 builds. So the first build that I've got going here is a capacitance AoE damage build, and this build is basically built for the discharge ability to deal as much damage to as many enemies as possible, or to stun as many enemies as possible. So for this build, we want to have a really high amount of ability range, so that way we affect as many enemies as possible with a single cast of discharge. So to get as much range as possible, we're running overextended and Archon stretch. The reason that we're using Archon stretch over regular stretch is because of the passive benefit. Now, if you don't have Archon stretch, you can definitely use regular stretch if you want to, but Archon stretch is going to be our main way of sustaining energy. So it gives us the plus 45% ability range that we're looking for, but then it also reads abilities that deal electric damage restore 2 energy per second over 5 seconds. And because we have this bonus, we don't really have to run a lot to sustain our energy. So, you know, a lot of builds, they like to run like Equilibrium, for example, and that's simply for energy sustain, right? It's not really for anything else. So because of Archon stretch and because of the fact that Vault's abilities deal electric damage, well, we can use this to sustain our energy. This is going to pair very well with Streamline and Arcane Energize, and that's just going to make sure that we're always able to cast our abilities, and we're also always going to be basically topped up in the amount of energy that we have. Now, I'm not running Prime Flow on here, and that's because Vault Prime's maximum energy capacity is at 300. You can see that on the left hand side of the screen. If you wanted to, you could definitely run Flow if you really want to, but I don't really think it's necessary because the abilities aren't that costly and you are going to be sustaining so much energy because of the Archon stretch and the Arcane Energize combo. Then next up, we need to increase our ability strength somehow. So to do that, I'm running Transient Fortitude, Blind Rage, Growing Power, and Molt Augmented. So Molt Augmented is going to give you an additional 60% ability strength once you've actually got 250 kills in a mission. And this is a build that you're going to be using in the likes of a survival, a defense, interception, mobile defense, etc, 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 and you're going to be getting a lot of kills with this build anyway because of the high ability range stat. We do need to have a little bit of ability duration on this build as well, because if you hover over Discharge, you can see that it does actually have a duration tied to it. You can see there at the bottom it says effect duration. And by equipping Prime Continuity or regular continuity, if you don't have the Prime version, you basically just increase the effect duration. And that's basically the amount of time that an enemy is going to stay stunned for. And then finally, all we have to consider for this build is our defense. So for defense, I'm running Prime Sure-Footed, so I never knock myself over or get knocked over by an enemy. If you don't have this, you can replace this with the likes of Power Drift, for example. Now, that's not a defensive mod, but that's going to give you bonus ability strength. I've got Rolling Guard equipped, so if I lose all of my shields or if I have a deadly stab status proc on me, like a bleed proc or a toxin proc, I can just roll to make it go away. And then I'm going to be invincible for 3 seconds, which is quite nice. And then finally, we've got Vault's discharge augment. So this is capacitance. And basically what this does, it's going to convert a certain amount of your damage into overshields for you. It's even going to share with the entire squad. So you're all going to have like a really good shield get. Now the enemies that I've got in front of me, these are level 215 Steel Path Corrupted Heavy Gunners. So we're not going to be dealing a lot of damage to them because they're not really that weak to electric damage. But if we go ahead and we cast Discharge, we can see that all of them are stunned and they're all getting a lot of damage over time applied to them, right? Now in lower level missions, this ability or this build is absolutely going to shred, but in these higher level missions with these heavily armored enemies, we need some way to basically like make the enemies squishier or deal more damage. And to do this, what we do is we go and we gain access to the helmet system, we get Necros's Terrify ability, and we put that on in place of Volt Shock ability. Now this is a crowd control ability, but it's also an armor stripping ability as well. And as you can see, because of the amount of ability strength that we've got equipped, the armor reduction value that's with this ability is actually at 100%. So with one cast of Terrify, we're going to totally strip away all of the enemy's armor, making them far easier to kill. So what we do first is we go ahead and we cast Terrify, and then we cast Discharge, and as you can see, we're dealing far more damage, and all these enemies are basically going to die within one cast of Discharge, which is absolutely crazy to think that all you have to do is cast 2 abilities, and all of these heavily armored or prior heavily armored enemies are just going to basically die. And remember guys, that is this build being showcased without all of our multi-augmented stacks being built up. Whenever we get 250 kills, we're going to have a bonus 60% ability strength, so our abilities are going to deal far much more damage. So what I recommend doing if you're playing the likes of a mobile defense mission, survival mission, interception, etc, is just go ahead and place some electric shields around you like so. So you sort of trap yourself in this little box here, and then what you want to do is you want to go ahead and you cast your Terrify, and then you cast your Discharge, and you can go ahead and you can shoot through your shield to gain that bonus electric damage and crit damage from shooting through it. And that way, like, all the enemies are just going to die. Anyone that gets close, you can just go ahead and gun down. And just remember, you can cast a maximum of 6 shields. So what you can do is you can go ahead and cast 3 facing the way that like you're shooting, and then just place 1 to your right, 1 behind you, and then 1 to your left, and you're going to be fully covered, and you're going to be dealing so much more damage by shooting through the 3 at the front. You're also going to be fully protected from any like random projectiles or whatever. The next build that we have for Volt is his Speedy Boy build. Now this build is centered around his second ability, his speed ability, and basically what we're looking to achieve is the maximum speed buff that we possibly can, so we can get missions done as quickly as possible, while also keeping in mind like our survivability and energy sustain and stuff like that. So the way to make the most out of Volt's speed ability is actually by having as much ability strength as possible, and because we don't really want to worry about like energy economy and stuff like that, we want to be running a lot of ability duration, so we only have to cast it once. Let's say we're doing a capture mission or something like that. Those missions usually take like maybe 2 minutes if you're bad, and under a minute if you're really good at navigating. So with this build, we have a 27-second duration on our speed ability, so we maybe have to cast this like a total of twice, and it only costs us 38.7 energy to cast, so that's not too bad. As long as you're killing like a few enemies on your way through the mission, then you're probably going to get an energy orb, which is going to give you enough to cast speed again. Or let's say you're running Xeneric, you can get your passive energy regen with that. So for ability strength, we are running Blind Rage, Augur Secrets, Transient Fortitude, Growing Power, Umbral Intensify, and Molt Augmented. For ability duration, we're running Narrow Minded, Prime Continuity, and Molt Efficiency. For defense, we're going to be running Prime Sure Footed so we don't get knocked over by ourselves or enemies again, and Rolling Guard, so if we get affected by those nasty status procs, we can just roll them off. And then finally, as utility mod, because speed works as a multiplicative sort of speed boost, we're running the Rush mod to increase our base sprint speed by a little bit. So having a slightly higher base sprint speed is just going to make it so that we get the most out of this multiplicative bonus. So as you can see, if we just go ahead and we cast our speed ability, we actually go so much faster than normal. And the other thing we can do is, if we have access to the helmet system, we can replace Discharge with the Infested Mobility helmet ability. This is going to increase your parkour velocity and the sprint speed of your frame as well. So with Infested Mobility and speed active, you can see that we go even quicker. Now I know some of you maybe aren't going to be able to manage the speed bonus that you get from this build, but honestly I think it's quite fast and I can manage it pretty easily. So this is what I'm using in all of my relic missions and exterminate missions and stuff like that. And that's pretty much for the speed build. Now, last but definitely not least, we have a damage buffing or a weapon platform build for Vault. Now, this is my most used build for Vault by far, simply because it allows me to get those higher level missions done extremely quickly, because I can make use of Vault's speed ability, but I can also buff up my damage by quite a bit. So for this build, it's very important that you go ahead and you put a damage buffing ability over the top of Discharge by using the Helmet system. So I've opted for Roar simply because it's quite good and it's quite accessible. So because we're using Rhino's Roar, what we want to do is we want to increase the amount of ability strength and ability duration that we've got on by quite a bit. So for ability strength, we're running Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, Growing Power, and Molt Augmented. For ability duration, I'm only running Narrow Minded and Prime Continuity. For energy sustain, I'm running Equilibrium and Streamline. For defense, again, we've got Prime Surefooted and Rolling Guard. And then for even more damage boost, we're running Shock Trooper. Realistically, you can use any aura mod you want or any final arcane that you want, but I like to use Growing Power for that additional ability strength, and then Arcane Energize for the additional energy sustain, as those are the things that matter to me the most. Now with this build, it's really important that you keep in mind that the bonus electro damage that you're getting from the Shock Trooper augment is only going to be applied if you actually hold down the shock ability to cast it. If you pay attention to the top right hand corner of the screen, if I just tap my first ability, you see that I get no buff. But if I hold it down, you can see the shock symbol and the Shock Trooper augment actually proc in there. You can see the bonus is 254%, and you can see the duration right below it. You can also see whenever you actually shared it with a companion or a teammate just by looking to the left-hand side of their health and shield. And the other important thing to note about the Shock Trooper augment is that the bonus electro damage here is going to combine with the elements on your weapons. So for example, on this build, this is a pure Toxin Torrid build, so it only has Toxin damage equipped. But if I go ahead and I shoot at an enemy here while I've got the Shock Trooper augment active, what's going to happen is it's going to turn into corrosive damage, as you can see. So especially because of the arcane bonus damage meta that we're sort of going for right now, if your arcane requires you to deal a certain type of elemental damage for bonus damage or bonus crit or something like that, you've got to be extra careful whenever it comes to using the likes of Shock Trooper to actually buff up your damage, because that electric damage is going to combine with the elements present on your weapon. So in this case, I'm using Primary Blight, and it reads on Toxin status effect because it basically assumes that I'm going to be dealing Toxin damage with this build. But if I was using Shock Trooper to buff up the damage, obviously I'd be using Corrosive, therefore my Primary Blight wouldn't be doing anything. So just something to keep in mind if you go to use this type of build on Vault. You're better off using a weapon that actually has electric damage on it or takes advantage of electric damage in some way, such as the Phantasma Prime. As you can see, I'm running Viral, Radiation, and Electric. So Shock Trooper and Roar is just going to increase the amount of damage that we deal, basically, because that's what we're running on the Phantasma Prime anyway. We've got that electric damage, so the electric damage from Shock Trooper and all the other sources is just going to buff it up. So what I would recommend doing is just go ahead, place down an electric shield, and then you can pick it up like so. Go ahead, cast your Roar and cast your Shock Trooper, and then you can just hold down left click and you can see that you're dealing a ton of electric damage now and a lot of damage over time because of all the buffs that we've got. This Vault build is going to make getting through Steel Path content extremely easy. Having Shock Trooper actually merge with the elements on your weapons can sometimes be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the type of build that you got and the faction that you're going against. So for example, let's say I've made like a corrosive and heat build, but then I come across an enemy which is armor but also weak to radiation. What I can do is I can go ahead and I can cast Shock Trooper. The bonus electric is going to merge with that bonus heat damage that I've got on my weapon to make corrosive and radiation. Therefore, I'm going to deal more damage versus the heavily armored weak to radiation enemy that I'm talking about. So it's not always a bad thing that it's going to merge with the elements on your weapon. It's also quite good if you're using melee influence because it requires you to run electric damage, as you can see. So we're just basically shredding through. We can have a speed active to speed up our melee hits as well. This is 6 electric shields that I've actually got placed down here. Got my Shock Trooper active, got my Roar active. I hold down left click with the Phantasma, and as you can see, 1 magazine and the level 215 Steel Path Corrupted Heavy Gunner just dies. you can see the amount of electric procs that we actually build up. It's quite insane. But these are the free vault builds that I would recommend running for your casual content and your steel path content. Though you can make other builds for vault for the likes of Eidolons and the Plague Star event, but because those builds are so different, they require like Umbra mods and stuff like that, you're going to have mismatching polarities. So I'd recommend actually crafting an entirely new vault for those types of builds. And for those types of builds, I'm actually going to cover those in like mission specific videos, right? So whenever I talk about Eidolons, then I'm going to show off those builds, or whenever I talk about Plague Star, then I'll show off those builds, because they're not really relevant to, the star chart content and opening relics and stuff like that. These are free builds that I just run because, one, the polarities sort of all match, and two, they all have their uses, right? So this is good whenever there's a lot of enemies running at you, or you need to defend something. This is good for the likes of capture missions. You need to get something done quick, and this is good for that harder content where you need to deal a little bit more damage. But yeah, for a starter frame, or a frame that you can get extremely early from your clan's Tenno Vault is one of the most versatile, probably one of the best frames in the game, honestly, because he can go so deep into endgame content. But that's pretty much it for my ultimate vault build guide. If you guys enjoyed it, leave a like if you did, subscribe for more Warframe content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.